Hello, morning, afternoon, something like that. Hi, everyone. Hi. We're gonna get started with our new book today. Is the book of Leviticus. So we're hopping in, we're trucking along, we're in the third book of the Bible, and we got some stuff to learn before we begin reading, okay? So I attached to this video, as usual, the overview and the devotional. The overview gives you good insight about what you could expect from the overarching story of Leviticus, and the devotional today was strictly about God's character of graciousness, and it delves into what it means to us and to God to be gracious. I wanted to jump back before I go ahead and talk about or read through Leviticus. What I want to address is, I know there was a section where, so in Exodus 32, Moses has to come down and enact some, he enacts the raft of what he's feeling, what God's feeling, because the people of Israel have sinned, right? So he turns to Aaron, he's like, what have these people done to you to lead them to sin this way? And then Aaron's like makes this excuse or whatever. And then he realizes, that Aaron wasn't really keeping them in line. So then he calls out to the people of Israel and he says, everyone who is on God's side, may you come to me. And then it says that the Levites step forward, and then he tells everyone to go from one camp to the other camp and kill anyone. Maybe I should go quote that directly. Let's see, where Jen. Anyway, go to Exodus 32. I think it's like somewhere towards the end. Right. So Exodus 32:22. Sorry. This is all of Aaron's excuses. So I told them blah blah blah. 25. Moses saw that Aaron had let the people get completely out of control, much to the amusement of their enemies. So he stood at the entrance of the camp and shouted, all who are on the Lord's side, come here and join me. And all the Levites gathered around him. Moses told them, this is the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel says. Each of you take your swords and go back and forth from one end of the camp to the other. Kill everyone, even your brothers, friends, and neighbors. The Levites obeyed Moses' command. The Levites obeyed Moses' command, and about 3,000 people died that day. Then Moses told the Levites, today you have ordained yourselves for the service of the Lord, for you obeyed him, and even though it meant killing your own sons and brothers, today you have earned a blessing, right? So that's what he goes on to say to the Levites. After all of that is, I was having a conniption because I didn't know who the Levites were. I was like, who is this? What? Where are they coming from? So then I do a little, I think I was going to let it go. until I realized that the book of Leviticus, I was like, wait a minute, isn't that tied to what's going on here? So the book of Leviticus then means, the definition of Leviticus means of the Levites. So, and then I got brought back to Leviticus being Levites, and then I was like, well, then what the heck? Who are they? And then I kept going, and the Levites are a tribe of Israel. So, you know, this whole time in Genesis, before Genesis 32 ends up going down, everyone's being referred to as the people of Israel. And because it's the 12 tribes are pretty much united into one form of people of Israel, until Genesis 32, where Moses calls for a separation of the people who are truly on the Lord's side. And that's when the Levites gathered. I assume that more tribes gathered as well than just the Levites, because they only end up killing 3,000 people of the 600,000 or whatever. So I assume more of them gather, but the Levites at that point were so numerous and populous that they end up calling everyone or addressing them as the Levites. But that's an assumption. I don't know. Maybe just the one tribe breaks free and they all are generally the Levites. But they are the descendants of the tribe of Levi. And Levi is Jacob's son. Jacob's fourth or fifth son. It's not third, fourth, or fifth. I'm gonna go look it up. Because I have it highlighted separately. Yeah, Levi is Jacob's third son. It goes Reuben, Simon, Levi, Judah, and then is the rest of them. So from there, I was like, okay, that's interesting. Let's go find out about this tribe a little bit. Let's look at them a little closer, right? So then, I think we're in Genesis 49. Genesis 49. Yeah, if we jump to Genesis 49 verses 5 through 7, we get a bit of insight about Levi. This is technically about Simon and Levi. Simon and Levi are two of a kind. Their weapons are instruments of violence. May I never join in their meetings. May I never be a party to their plans. For in their anger they murdered men, and they crippled oxen just for sport. A curse on their anger, for it is fierce. A curse on their wrath, for it is cruel. I will scatter them among the descendants of Jacob. I will disperse them throughout Israel. And so that's a little bit of a description, I guess, specifically of Levi and Simon. But I am drawn to assume that the description of Levi, the head of the family, kind of flows through the tribe as a whole. So I just want to highlight that, and then I guess I'm gonna add, let's add a note here. Question. Is this a description of the tribe as a whole. Levites separate. The Levites are themselves a blessing in Genesis 32 through a great act of violence, but Levites earn themselves through a great act of violence. But I wonder if that violence could be described as God's justice. Described yeah, I think in that act in Genesis 32, 26, 27-ish, that area. I think that act is an act of very gray area because God wanted to erase all of Israel. Then he gets appeased by Moses, and then Moses tells these people, he calls for a separation of people who were against God and willing to worship this calf to the people who are of God or are on God's side, and he kind of draws out the Levites. They step forward and claim to be on God's side. They had no idea in that call forward that Moses would be like, well, this is what the Lord said, go and kill everyone. But that's what they said. That's what Moses said, and that's what they did. And in that, they earned the blessing. But I would assume in the earning of the blessing, I don't have to assume. It's clear that when someone earns a blessing, it's because they're acted. They're acted or acting in the will of God. It's a gray area. So, at least for me, yeah, that's a little bit of what I wanted to really understand before we hopped into Leviticus, the reading of Leviticus, because then going forward, I read where I watched the overview video, which is attached, and it talked about how Leviticus is about cleansing. The atonement of the Israelites, Moses and the Israelites, because Exodus ends with Moses, the leader of the Israelites, being unable to enter the tabernacle after its construction, and after it's filled with the glory of God. So we basically end that whole chapter about how the Israelites are supposed to be set free and become one of God's people living among God, with them being able to enter into God's presence. So Leviticus then details, or his job is to detail how the Israelite people are made right in the eyes of God, so that they can enter the tabernacle and live in communion with God. Yes. Then, yeah. So that brings us to the start of the chapter. Whew. Okay. My stomach hurts a little bit. Just a little bit. One. Let me jump over to the plan. I need the plan. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Okay, so the devotional is basically, what does it mean to say that God is? What does it mean to say that the God of the Bible is gracious? In this video, we will look at the Hebrew words for grace to understand the rich concept that has profound implications for how we see God. When we look at the biblical meaning of grace and understand God as gracious, we see a God who loves to give generous gifts to undeserving people. Yeah. Okay, Leviticus 1. Procedures for the burnt offering. The Lord called to Moses from the tabernacle and said to him, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. When you present an animal as an offering to the Lord, you may take it from your herd of cattle or your flock of sheep and goats. If the animal you present is a burnt offering, is from the herd, it must be a male with no defects. Bring it to the entrance of the tabernacle, so you may be accepted by the Lord. Lay your hand on the animal's head, and the Lord will accept its death in your place to purify you, making you right with him. Then slaughter the young bull in the Lord's presence, and Aaron's sons, the priests, will present the animal's blood by splattering it against all the sides of the altar that stands at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then skin the animal and cut it into pieces. The sons of Aaron, the priest, will build a wood fire on the altar. They will arrange the pieces of the offering, including the head and fat, on the wood burning on the altar. But the internal organs and legs must first be washed with water. Then the priest will burn the entire sacrifice on the altar as a burnt offering. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If the animal you present as a burnt offering is from the flock, it may be either a sheep or a goat, but it must be a male with no defects. Slaughter the animal on the north side of the altar in the Lord's presence, and Aaron's sons, the priests, will splatter the blood against all sides of the altar. Then cut the animal in pieces, and the priest will arrange the pieces of the offering, including the head and fat, on the wood burning on the altar. But the internal organs and the legs must first be washed with water. Then the priest will burn the entire sacrifice on the altar as a burnt offering. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If you present a bird as a burnt offering to the Lord, choose either a turtle dove or a young pigeon. The priest will take the bird to the altar, wringing off its head, and burn it on the altar. But first he must drain its blood against the side of the altar. The priest also must remove the crop and the feathers, and throw them in the ashes on the east side of the altar. Then Grasping the bird by its wings, the priest will tear the bird open, but without tearing it apart. Then he will burn it as a burnt offering on the wood burning on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. So he's supposed to tear it without tearing it apart, but I guess only tear it in the middle, like butterfly it. Tear it. I don't think they mean physically tear it though, right? To the King James! And he shall cleave it with the wings thereof, but shall not divide it asunder. And the priest shall burn it upon the altar, upon the wood that is upon the fire. It is a burnt offering, an offering made by fire, of a sweet savor unto the Lord. Let's check out the Good News Translation. He shall take hold of its wings and tear its body open, without tearing off the wings, and then burn it whole on the altar. The odor of this food offering is a pleasing to the Lord. Tear the board open without dividing it. He must tear the bird open by its wings, without dividing it into two parts. Well, okay. Interesting. Yeah, like I said before, I'm really glad I don't gotta commit any sacrifices. Except myself. All of these sacrifices, all of these burnt offerings, specifically, are to carry the sins and burn off the sins of the people of Israel to make them right. So like when you sin, you offer your burnt offering, and you try to cleanse yourself. You ritualistically cleanse yourself from that sin that you were carrying, from that uncleanliness that you were carrying, and you make yourself right by the Lord. So, yes, there are specific ways to do it, specific animals to choose, specific body parts to burn and clean and then burn, and that's what we learn about here. So, that's Leviticus 1. Moving into Leviticus 2, we get procedures for the grain offering. When you present grain as an offering to the Lord, the offering must consist of choice flour. You are to pour olive oil on it, sprinkle it with frankincense, and burn it to Aaron's sons, the priest. The priest will scoop out a handful of flour moistened with oil, together with all the frankincense, and burn this representative portion on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering will then be given to Aaron and his sons. This offering will be considered a most holy part of the special gifts presented to the Lord. If your offering is a grain offering baked in an oven, it must be made of choice flour without any yeast. It must be presented in the form of thin cakes mixed with olive oil, or wafers spread with olive oil. If your grain offering is cooked on a griddle, it must be made of choice flour mixed with olive oil but without any yeast. Break it in pieces and pour olive oil on it. It is a grain offering. If your grain offering is prepared in a pan, it must be made of choice flour and olive oil. No matter how a grain offering for the Lord has been prepared, bring it to the priest, who will present it at the altar. The priest will take a representative portion of the grain offering and burn it on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. The rest of the grain offering will then be given to Aaron and his sons as their food. This offering will be considered a most holy part of the special gifts presented to the Lord. Do not use yeast in preparing any of the grain offerings you present to the Lord, because no yeast or honey may be burned as a special gift presented to the Lord. You may add yeast and honey to an offering of the first crops of your harvest, but these must never be offered on the altar as a pleasing aroma to the Lord. My bad. Season all your offerings with salt to remind you of God's eternal covenant. Never forget to add salt to your grain offerings. Season all your offerings with salt to remind you of God's eternal covenant. Okay? No, never forget the salt. If you present a grain offering to the Lord from the first portion of your harvest, bring fresh grain that is coarsely ground and roasted on a fire. Put olive oil on this grain offering and sprinkle it with frankincense. The priest will take a representative portion of the grain moistened with oil, together with all the frankincense, and burn it as a special gift presented to the Lord. Okay? Procedures for the peace offering. If you present an animal from the herd as a peace offering to the Lord, it may be a male or female, but it must have no defects. Lay your hand on the animal's head and slaughter it at the entrance of the tabernacle. So burnt offerings are slaughtered to the north of the tabernacle, to the north of the altar at the tabernacle. Then Aaron's sons, the priest, will splatter its blood against all sides of the altar. The priest must present part of this peace offering as a special gift to the Lord. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys. And Aaron's sons will burn them on the top of the burnt offerings on the wood burning on the altar. It is a special gift, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. If you present an animal from the flock as a peace offering to the Lord, it may be a male or female, but it must have no defects. If you present a sheep as your offering, bring it to the Lord. Lay your hand on its head and slaughter it in front of the tabernacle. Aaron's sons will then splatter the sheep's blood against all the sides of the altar. The priest must present the fat of this peace offering as a special gift to the Lord. This includes the fat of the broad tail cut off near the backbone, all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and the priest will burn them on the altar. It is a special gift of food presented to the Lord. If you present a goat as your offering, bring it to the Lord. Lay your hand on its head and slaughter it in front of the tabernacle. Aaron's sons will then splatter the goat's blood against all sides of the altar. The priest must present part of this offering as a special gift to the Lord. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and the priest will burn them on the altar. It is a special gift of food, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. All the fat belongs to the Lord. And you must never eat any fat or blood. This is a permanent law for you. It must be observed from generation to generation, wherever you live. You must never eat any fat or blood. This is a permanent law for you. Okay. Here goes with food. I think I put food in. I don't know where I put food. I have to go for the myself. Aha! Procedures for the sin offering. Procedures for the sin offering. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel. This is how you are to deal with those who sin unintentionally by doing anything that violates the Lord's commands." I thought that's what burnt offerings were for. I'm gonna look that up later. Let's finish this. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Give the following instructions to the people of Israel." Oh no, I read that already. We're on Leviticus 4:3. If the high priest sins, bringing guilt upon the entire community, he must give a sin offering for the sin he has committed. He must present to the Lord a young bull with no defects. He must bring the bull to the Lord at the entrance of the tabernacle, lay his hand on the bull's head, and slaughter it before the Lord. The high priest will then take some of the bull's blood into the tabernacle, dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord in front of the inner curtain of the sanctuary. The priest will then put some of the blood on the horns of the altar for fragrant incense that stands in the Lord's presence inside the tabernacle. He will pour out the rest of the bull's blood at the base of the altar for burnt offerings at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then the priest must remove all of the fat of the bull to be offered as a sin offering. This includes all the fat around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys, and the fat around them near the loins, and the long lobe of the liver. He must remove these along with the kidneys, just as he does with the cattle offered as a peace offering, and burn them on the altar of burnt offerings. But he must take whatever is left of the bull, its hide, meat, head, legs, internal organs, and dung, and carry it away to a place outside the camp that is ceremonially clean. Ceremonially clean? So they have to clean this place beforehand? And place the place where the ashes are dumped. Oh. There, on the ash heap, he will burn it on a wood fire. If the entire Israelite community sins by violating one of the Lord's commands, but the people don't realize it, they are still guilty. When they become aware of their sin, the people must bring a young bull as an offering for their sin and present it before the tabernacle. The elders of the community must then lay their hands on the bull's head and slaughter it before the people. The high priest will then take some of the bull's blood into the tabernacle, dip their finger in the blood, and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord in front of the inner curtain. He will then put some of the blood on the horns of the altar for fragrant incense that stands in the Lord's presence inside the tabernacle. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar for the burnt offerings at the entrance of the tabernacle. Then the priest must remove all the animal's fat and burn it on the altar, just as he does with the bull offered as a sin offering for the high priest. Through this process, the priest will purify the people, making them right with the Lord, and they will be forgiven. Then the priest must take what is left of the bull and carry it outside the camp and burn it there, just as is done with the sin offering for the high priest. This offering is for the sin of the entire congregation of Israel. If one of Israel's leaders sins by violating one of the commands of the Lord, but God sins by violating one of the commands of the Lord his God, but doesn't realize it, he is still guilty. When he becomes aware of his sin, he must bring as his offering a male goat with no defects. He must lay his hand on the goat's head and slaughter it at the place where burnt offerings are slaughtered before the Lord. This is an offering for his sin. Then the priest will dip his finger in the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar. For the burnt offerings. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Then he must burn all the goat's fat on the altar, just as he does with the peace offering. Through this process, the priest will purify the leader from his sin, making him right with the Lord, and he will be forgiven. If any of the common people sin by violating one of the Lord's commands, but they don't realize it, they are still guilty. When they become aware of their sin, they must bring as an offering for their sin a female goat with no defects. They must lay a hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it at the place where burnt offerings are slaughtered. Then the priest will dip his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Then he will remove all the goat's fat, just as he does with the fat of the peace offering. He will burn that fat on the altar, and it will be a pleasing aroma to the Lord. Through this process, the priest will purify the people, making them right with the Lord, and all will be forgiven. If the people bring a sheep as their sin offering, it must be a female with no defects. They must lay a hand on the head of the sin offering and slaughter it at the place where burnt offerings are slaughtered. Then the priest will dip his finger in the blood of the sin offering and put it on the horns of the altar for burnt offerings. He will pour out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. Then he must remove all the sheep's fat, just as he does with the fat of the sheep presented as a peace offering. He will burn the fat on the altar of the top of the special gifts presented. He will burn the fat on the altar on top of the special gifts presented to the Lord. Through this process, the priest will purify the people from their sin, making them right with the Lord, and they will be forgiven. Making them right with the Lord, and they will be forgiven. There we go. This gives me what I want, I think. Okay, so we had burnt offerings, grain offerings, peace offerings, sin offerings, and guilt offerings. I guess we didn't get to guilt offerings yet. So the offering, the sin offering, the difference between the sin offering and the burnt offering. Burnt offering is, the purpose of the burnt offering was for general atonement of sin and expresses an expression of devotion to God. We got the instructions. The offering could be, we did that through. The burnt offering was likely the earliest type of atonement offering in the Old Testament. The primary contrast between the Old Testament burnt offerings and the Canaanite burnt offering was that the Canaanites would offer children as burnt sacrifices for their own atonement, although this does not occur during the worst of Israel's history. Judges 11, God made it clear that he would not accept children as burnt offerings, and the instructions given in Leviticus explicitly limit the type of animals to be offered as burnt offerings to bulls, rams, and birds. Okay, well, we're nowhere near Judges, I don't think. So that's a quick little spoiler. But I guess the difference between the burnt offering and the sin offering is that the sin offering is when you've clearly sinned already. This offering is sometimes seen as an offering of atonement for unintentional sin. Similarly, it is sometimes viewed as guilt offering, removing the consequences for lack of perfection. As an atonement offering, it contained elements of a burnt offering, yet at the same time it had elements of a peace offering. Conversely, some of the sins for which one needed to atone were not moral sins, but rather matters of ritual impurity, such as some have proposed the term purification offering instead of sin offering. The primary purpose of this offering is not to atone for sins, but rather to purify oneself for re-entering the presence of God. The elements of a purification offering could be any of the elements of the previous three types offerings, though unlike the peace offering, the meal was not to be shared by the one offering the sacrifice. It's not a purification offering, that's just their wanting to change the terminology around. I'm fine with the terminology of sin offering. I just needed to know what the difference between the sin offering and the burnt offering was. So a burnt offering is about like the overall general act of sinning. Right? Because that isn't that one of the things you worry about like when you first start becoming a Christian and you're like diving deep and you're trying to run closer to the Lord and you're trying to get close and you're just realizing how everything's sin, like how it's so easy to sin, how we are born into iniquity and sin, and then it starts spinning your head and you're like, wow, is there ever a way that I can be free from sin? No, because you're human. But there is a way to cleanse yourself of those sins and to make yourself right with the presence of the Lord. So in the overview, it was saying how, yes, sin happens and there are like the base general sins, the unknowing sins, and like the seven deadly, like the really big one. I mean, all sins are equal, but then there are like the seven deadly ones, like the root of the ones. And then they said that the major sin, the sin that truly causes you to die by sin, yes, the sin that truly causes you to die with your sin is the sin of carrying your uncleanliness into the presence of the Lord. Yeah. So it's one thing to sin and then to repent, ask for that forgiveness of the sin, to cleanse yourself of the sin, to make yourself right of sin in front of the Lord. then, like, to know you've sinned, no, to be guilty of sin, because you can be guilty of sin even though you didn't know you sinned, which was the purpose of the sin offering, right? Like, once they're aware, they have to make the sin offering. Yes, so you can be guilty of sin. Just the real problem is to bring yourself before the Lord without consecrating yourself, without cleansing yourself of that sin, or trying to stand in such a good and holy place without being clean, not perfect, not free of sin, but atoned of your sins. Yeah, I'm gonna go into this whole offering thing because I'm gonna dive into that and really figure out the parts and the components. I like that the sin offering is a mixture of a burnt offering and a peace offering, and the peace offering is blah blah blah. Thanksgiving offerings, farewell offerings, wave offerings, blah blah blah. The offering could be cat. Yeah. The purpose of the peace offering was to consecrate a meal between two or more parties before God and share that meal together in fellowship of peace and a commitment to each other's future prosperity. So instead of like the part of where they get to eat, the portions unsuitable for eating were given to God. They were burnt off to God. Depending on the type of peace offering, the breast may have been given to the high priest, the right thigh may have been given to the priest officiating the meal, and the rest of the meal was to be eaten within 1 day of the fellowship of the parties, and the leftovers were to be burned after 2 days. So, what was cool is that in the sin offering, you don't then eat of that meal because that animal symbolically carries the sin and is unclean. It needs to be burnt completely off to ash. But in the peace offering, this animal is not carrying any sin. Right? Did we go over what the peace offering? I don't think we went over peace offerings yet. First discussing Leviticus 3. And then Leviticus 7 is about where it gives you the detail. Maybe we did go over peace offering. I don't know. Sorry if all the offerings blurred together. Maybe a little bit. No, we did peace offering. Lay your hand on the animal's head and slaughter at the entrance of the tabernacle. Slaughter side. Splatter blood on the sides of the altar. This includes the fat and all the internal organs and fat and stuff. No. All the fat around the internal organs gets burned off. And the kidneys also get burned off. So this is the one where it's like it's a special gift of food to the Lord. So basically, that the Lord eating the parts of the meal that we aren't allowed to eat, he gets his portion. The priests get their particular cuts, and then the parties present for the peace offering get to eat of that. And then that's all the celebration of the peace offering. But once that day is over, there can't be any leftovers. They eat everything, and then whatever's left has to be burnt off. Okay. The peace offering got it's a full chapter. Excuse me. Yeah. That's interesting. I definitely have to dive into I kind of have to understand more about how these offerings come into play, like when you realize those offerings come into play, because even though we don't do this anymore, we aren't called to do this anymore, I still think that offerings are replaced by prayer and atonement, and there is a purpose of knowing like why these come into play, knowing when they come into play, realizing what to do when they come into play. That can be incorporated into our prayer lives. A specific way you go about praying over and asking for forgiveness, that can be incorporated into your prayer life if you know more about how the offerings go about. If you know more about the reasoning behind the offerings. But what also got me is that Aaron's sons here, the priest here played mediator. Like, okay, so you get your offering, you place your hand on the head of the offering, and then you slaughter it. And from there, Aaron's sons take the blood of that or whatever fat they have to burn off, whatever pieces need to be burned off, and then they go and proceed. Putting the blood where the blood needs to go, putting the fat where the fat needs to go, burning off whatever, doing what they need to do with the animal. So they in turn play this mediator position, this mediator role between clearing the people of Israel of their sin and bringing their offering before the Lord, and vice versa. Which I think is why, like, if the priest sinned, it meant the whole of Israel sinned. Like, there were the sins for the leaders, there was the sins for the individual, sins for the which ended up staying as, like, the individual issue. The leader sin, who they're leading sin as well. And, like, there was, I guess, more of a to-do to clear them of their sin. But, like, the biggest to-do was for the priest. The priest end up sinning. This is what they have to do. So yeah, it means pray for who you're allowing to lead you. And like, yes, you have to. There are people you allow to lead you willingly. You have to pray for them and cover them, and, like, you know, hopefully you've chosen good people. Hopefully you trust the people you allow to lead. But then ultimately know that the leader of your leaders, your ultimate leader is the person is the being you're trying to make yourself right with at all times. Yeah, okay. So tomorrow we read more of Leviticus. Let's take a look. Let's see where we go. Should be Leviticus 4. Oh no, I'm wrapping up and I still got more work to do. But tomorrow is 5 through 7. And then Psalms 31. Today, Psalms 30. A Psalm of David, a song of dedication of the temple. A song for the dedication of the temple. I will exalt you, Lord, for you rescued me. You refused to let my enemies triumph over me. O Lord, my God, I cried to you for help, and you restored my health. Woo! You brought me up from the grave, O Lord. You kept me from falling into the pit of death. Sing to the Lord, all you godly ones. Praise his holy name. For his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes with the morning. When I was prosperous, I said, nothing can stop me now. Your favor, O Lord, made me as secure as a mountain. Then you turned away from me, and I was shattered. I cried out to you, O Lord. I begged the Lord for mercy, saying, what will you gain if I die, if I sink into the grave? Can my dust praise you? Can it tell of your faithfulness? Hear me, Lord, and have mercy on me. Help me, O Lord. You have turned my mourning into joyful dancing. You have taken away my clothes of mourning and clothed me with joy, that I might sing praises to you and not be silent. O Lord my God, I will give you thanks forever. Hi, missed that. Have a good evening. I gotta get to work. So, bye.